The NHL has an overtime problem. Back in 2015-2016, when the new overtime rules were implemented, including a 3-on-3 OT period, play went back and forth at a breakneck pace. There were chances galore, odd man rushes, breakaways. It was absolutely thrilling. Now, just a few years later, NHL teams seem to have figured out the quote-unquote meta game of overtime, which is basically hold the puck as long as you can, be very deliberate with your entries into the offensive zone, maintain possession, get fresh legs out there constantly, and basically take as few risks as possible to avoid the other team getting an on-man rush going the other way. This has led to more overtimes ending in a tie and more games going to a shootout, because it seems like teams are more comfortable giving up a shootout win as opposed to a regulation overtime win, which counts towards the playoff seedings. And as a result, back in November, NHL GMs met to discuss some rule changes that could make the 3-on-3 overtime a bit more compelling and prevent more games from going to the shootout. Reportedly, some of the solutions that were proposed in these GM meetings, including things like half-court restrictions, so you can't take the puck back over the center ice line once you've entered the quote-unquote attacking zone, I guess, and timers for players to exit their own defensive zone. These are all borrowed from basketball in large part, but they don't really address the core issue, which is that in 3-on-3 overtime, there's just much more open ice, which means that players can take advantage of that space to keep possession of the puck, and as long as they do, they prevent the other team from scoring. I also don't really like that those rule changes would fundamentally change the play on the ice. Like, there's no shot clock in the regular game, so why should there be one in overtime? And similar for the over and back rule or the over the half court rule, so to speak. And even though I don't like any of those solutions, I do have a few of my own that I think could actually make 3-on-3 overtime a much more compelling event, while not fundamentally altering the game, quote unquote, so as to make it unrecognizable from the rest of the game. And to be clear, I am only talking about regular season overtimes. The sudden death ongoing overtime in the playoffs is perfect and should never be altered. But here are a few ideas I have to make the 3-on-3 overtime a little more compelling and interesting, and get scoring up so that we don't have as many shootouts. So my first idea is a very, very simple one, and it's not that chaotic. Just get rid of offsides and icing altogether in overtime. This will allow teams to make stretch passes and lob passes. They can ice the puck to make changes. Opens up the game. Is it kind of silly? Yes. Would it open up a little bit more opportunity for scoring? Also yes, but I also realize that this is probably not going to happen. I'm just throwing it out there as an idea. The second idea I had is basically what I call no-fly zone, which is no on-the-fly changes. One of the big reasons that overtime has gotten so stale is that teams can just rag the puck constantly and run down the clock. So with this rule change, you would only be able to change lines during a stoppage. This basically means that teams who have their players out there just skating around with the puck are going to get tired. Somebody's eventually going to make a mistake, and one team is maybe going to get a 2-on-1 going the other way. Or the team with the puck who needs a change is going to have to shoot it in or take an infraction of some kind, maybe skate off sides to stop the clock. Another idea I had that's really kind of out there is that you cannot use players in the shootout who you put out on the ice in overtime. This one's a bit wacky and weird, but the basic idea is that once a player goes on the ice in overtime, they cannot be at the top of the order in the shootout. You can only go with players who did not play in that 3-on-3 period. This will encourage teams to make more shifts more quickly to try and get more players on the ice, or they're going to either have to make the decision to put their bad players out in overtime and risk maybe turning the puck over and giving up the OT goal, or put those bad players out there at the top of the shootout and risk losing there. So there's a little bit of a strategic trade-off going on. But those first three are kind of the quote-unquote weird options that I have. I don't really love any of them. They're just kind of fun and interesting. But there are two that I really think would be good options to make 3-on-3 overtime a lot more engaging and fast. With that being said, they are both pretty drastic changes to the overtime format, so bear with me. I know that both of these are going to sound kind of insane. So the first idea I have is what I call lacrosse rules, and it's a pretty substantial change to the fundamental play of hockey. So, in overtime, we would go back to a 4-on-4 system. However, when the puck has crossed the blue line into the attacking or defending zone, each team must leave one player outside the zone. So Philadelphia is playing Pittsburgh, and Crosby takes the puck into the Flyers zone. Both the Penguins and the Flyers must leave one player outside the zone. So Pittsburgh is only attacking with 3 and has one player outside the zone, while the Flyers are only defending with 3 and have one player outside the zone who is just basically waiting to spring on a break if the puck ever gets dumped up the boards. Now, it's important to note both players outside the zone could play the puck. They just have to stay outside of the attacking or defending zone. So it would be like offsides rule. As long as the player has one skate over the blue line, they are still technically not in the zone. If they cross into the zone and play the puck, then it is a too many men on the ice penalty, and their team goes down a man for a regular 4-on-3 power play, just like we have now in overtime. And one other thing is that, unlike in lacrosse, you don't have to designate one player as being the one who can't go into the offensive or defensive zones. It can be any player on the ice. You just can't have more than 3 go past the blue line at one time. The reason I like this is that it keeps the flow of the play open in the attacking and defending zones. There's a lot more open ice to make plays, but in the neutral zone, there are going to be more players who can play the puck, which means that there are more opportunities for one player to potentially get the puck and chip it into the offensive zone. You can't just rag the puck back and back and back endlessly, and it gives teams more things to think about because you can't have 4 players back in the defensive zone to pass the puck between. You have the option at all times of somebody you can spring for a deep break if you want to. But like I said, it's a fundamental change to how the structure of hockey takes place in overtime, so I can understand why some people will be resistant to it. That's why I have my second idea, which is even wilder and might require a lot more explanation, even though in practice I think it'll be much simpler and a lot more fun. This final solution that I have to make overtime better is what I call college football rules. And if you are a fan of American college football, you might have an idea of where I'm going with it. But if you don't know how college football overtime works, we'll get ready for some madness. So basically, let's say that Toronto and Montreal are playing each other and the game goes to overtime. One team, let's say Toronto, will start the overtime on a 1-minute 5-on-4 power play. Faceoff will start in the offensive zone, and they will have a minute to score a goal. When that 1-minute power play expires, or when Toronto scores a goal, the teams will switch. Montreal now goes to the power play for 1 minute. If Toronto scored on their first power play, Montreal must score to keep overtime going. If Toronto scores and Montreal fails to score, Toronto wins. If Toronto fails to score on their initial power play and then Montreal scores on theirs, Montreal wins. But if both score on their power play or both fail to score, then we repeat the cycle, this time with Montreal going on the power play first, then switching back to Toronto. After each team gets 2 sets of power plays, we then go to a 4-on-3 power play following the exact same format. So Toronto gets a 4-on-3, Montreal gets a 4-on-3. If they both score, Montreal then goes to a 4-on-3 and then Toronto. And then finally, if both teams are still tied at the end of this second 4-on-3 power play, each team gets a 1-minute 5-on-3 power play. And if both teams score, the team who scores fastest wins. If neither team scores, or if both teams somehow score in the same amount of time, then we go to a shootout. So effectively, we are just trading abbreviated power play opportunities, and the team who manages to score and keep the other team from scoring will win. Now, one obvious flaw is that the team who defends first, if they give up a goal, is heavily incentivized to just pull their goaltender immediately to try and get that goal back because they need to score to continue overtime, which leads me to my other and most important rule of this setup, which is that if either team at any point scores a shorthanded goal, they win automatically. That means in that first power play, if Toronto loses the puck and Montreal gets it and scores shorthanded, game is over, they win, they don't ever have to go on the power play, Toronto does not get a chance to go back. And so as a result, if Toronto scores on that initial power play, Montreal certainly can pull their goaltender for their own power play, but they have to know that Toronto, who is on the defense and can ice the puck, if they take a pot shot from anywhere, just clearing the puck towards the net, if it goes in, that's the game. They don't have a chance to score again. And yes, I know that this is going to make games a little bit longer because you're effectively adding about 8 to 9 minutes of power play time on bad ice, but it would increase scoring, it would lead to more teams having their best players on the ice for longer, and quite honestly, if we're already doing an exhibition type thing to decide games like the shootout, why not go with this? And are these ideas crazy? Absolutely, but NHL GMs are in a tough spot, and I fear that all they're going to do is add on some pretty ticky-tack rules for officials to get wrong.